Smart women do this to melt an avoidant without chasing or losing self-respect. When it comes to avoidant men, most women make the same emotional mistake without even realizing it because they try harder, explain more, and chase closeness in a way that actually pushes the avoidant further away instead of bringing him closer. And the truth that almost nobody tells you is that avoidants don't respond to pressure, emotional intensity, or constant reassurance. They respond to emotional safety, distance without abandonment, and connection without feeling controlled or trapped. A smart woman understands something very different from the beginning. She doesn't try to chase an avoidant into loving her. She instead creates a space where he slowly feels safe enough to come closer on his own terms. Because the avoidant nervous system is not built for emotional pursuit, it is built for emotional escape, and the moment they feel someone is demanding too much too soon, they instinctively withdraw, even if they genuinely like the person. So the first thing a smart woman does is she slows down her emotional energy without becoming cold, distant, or unavailable. She simply becomes balanced, grounded, and emotionally steady so the avoidant no longer feels overwhelmed by her presence. She does not flood him with constant messages, emotional check-ins, or repeated attempts to define the relationship, because she understands that consistency is more powerful than intensity when dealing with someone who fears emotional closeness. Instead of chasing reassurance, she gives space and allows silence to exist without panic, because she knows that avoidants often come back into emotional contact when they feel no pressure and no emotional demand pulling them. And in that space, something very interesting begins to happen. The avoidant starts to notice her absence without feeling attacked, and that absence creates curiosity instead of resistance. A smart woman also understands that emotional control is not attractive to an avoidant, so she never tries to force conversations, force clarity, or force emotional vulnerability at the wrong time, even if she deeply wants answers inside. Because the moment an avoidant feels emotionally cornered, they disconnect mentally first and physically later. So she chooses patience over pressure, even when it feels uncomfortable. But this does not mean she becomes passive or emotionless. Instead, she becomes selectively expressive, meaning she shares warmth, humor, and emotional presence in moments where the avoidant is naturally open instead of forcing it into moments where he is closed. This creates a pattern where the avoidant starts associating her presence with calmness rather than pressure, and that emotional association is what slowly softens his defenses over time. Another powerful thing a smart woman does is she does not overinvest emotionally before there is real consistency, because she understands that avoidance can show intense interest in the beginning and still disappear the moment emotional expectations rise. So instead of getting emotionally attached to potential, she stays grounded in behavior, and she only deepens her emotional investment when actions are stable, consistent, and repeated over time. She also never abandons her own life in the process, because one of the strongest attractions for an avoidant is a woman who has emotional independence, personal direction, and a life that does not revolve around his attention or validation. When he sees that she is not emotionally dependent on his responses, his distance no longer feels like control, and instead, it feels like he is free to come closer without pressure or obligation. A smart woman also uses emotional pacing instead of emotional escalation, meaning she lets connection build slowly, naturally, and without rushing labels, expectations, or future predictions that create internal pressure for the avoidant. Because avoidants don't fear love itself, they fear the feeling of losing autonomy inside love, so she makes sure the relationship never feels like emotional captivity. At the same time, she is not afraid to set quiet boundaries, not in a threatening or emotional way, but in a calm and self-respecting way that shows she values herself even when she cares deeply about him. And paradoxically, this is what actually increases attraction, because avoidants are often more drawn to someone who does not over-pursue them and who does not collapse emotionally when distance appears. A smart woman also avoids emotional over-explaining because she understands that the more she tries to explain her feelings in moments of disconnection, the more it feels like pressure to the avoidant instead of connection. So instead of long emotional speeches, she communicates clearly, briefly, and calmly, and then she steps back and allows the avoidant to process without emotional overwhelm. Over time, this creates a powerful shift in the dynamic because the avoidant starts realizing that being around her does not feel suffocating, dramatic, or emotionally demanding. It feels calm, safe, and surprisingly stable. And for an avoidant nervous system, stability is not boring, it is actually what creates trust, even though they may take time to admit or express it openly. The most important thing a smart woman does, however, is she never loses herself in the process of trying to understand him, because the moment she abandons her own emotional balance, the dynamic shifts from attraction to anxiety. So she continues building her own confidence, her own identity, and her own emotional world, which naturally keeps her energy attractive instead of desperate or emotionally reactive. And slowly something begins to change in the avoidant without him even realizing it fully. He starts coming closer, not because he was chased, but because he feels safe enough to stop running. He starts initiating more, opening up in small ways, and staying present for longer periods of time, because his nervous system no longer interprets her presence as pressure or emotional demand. But the real power of this approach is not just that it melts the avoidant, it is that it protects the woman's emotional health while still allowing connection to grow naturally if it is truly meant to grow. Because smart women eventually understand that love does not require chasing, proving, or forcing. It requires alignment, timing, and emotional safety on both sides. And in the end, what actually melts an avoidant is not intensity, not pressure, and not emotional pursuit, but rather calm consistency, emotional control, and the feeling that love with her does not cost him his sense of self. And when a woman finally masters that balance, she stops chasing avoidance altogether